Well, let's get to really the big conversation that's been going on around the country this week. You know, when I heard about the shooting in Parkland, Florida last week, and I had to talk to my children about it, and I sat here and I thought, is this going to be different than the mass shootings that we've talked about in the past, whether it happened in Las Vegas and what happened in Orlando 2 years ago? Will this be any different? And the one thing that, yes, it is different is really the galvanization of these young people who have not said we're victims, now they want something done, and they're using social media in a way that I don't think we've ever seen young people use before. And sometimes young people get this knock of not being engaged or not knowing what's going on. You are seeing a new generation of kids who are saying, we don't feel safe, and it's up to you people to make decisions so that we are. That's what really has changed for me in watching this entire debate. I'm going to start with you, Stephen, on what you've kind of experiencing your reaction.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this, I don't know if you are able to yet call it a movement, but certainly a reaction to this by the kids who were involved and now attracting other young people is significant. And it's important.
When do you think it changes from a reaction to a movement? How would you measure that?
I think the sustaining momentum is the thing that you talk about in a movement, right? Something that goes beyond a single incident and becomes an issue all itself. And I don't know if we're about to see that or not. I also had to explain this to my children because the news of Parkland broke while I was in the car with them, driving them home from school. It was the first time for me that I learned of a shooting involving children with my own children sitting that close. And it does make you think differently about it. I kept thinking in the car about the parents who were at that moment going up to that school or going to the hospital to try to determine if their kids were one of the ones who were killed. This is not a reasonable way to conduct life in this country, and the idea that we quote unquote can't do anything about it or that anything should be off the table in our effort to do it, I think is pretty absurd. And that's what these kids are saying is you have to do something, and we don't want you to sort of couch that in these other sort of restraints that historically have prevented us from doing anything.
Yeah, and I think that though the have to do something has to be very, very nuanced, because we're talking about school safety and what does that really involve. And then we're talking about gun control or different kind of regulations at the federal level, but then we're really seeing the action happening at the state level. You look at what different states have done, and especially Connecticut, in different ways, their ban on assault weapons. And then we're talking about mental health issues, Nolan. So, you know, I feel like we're back to where we have always been in talking
bump up against each other because you know, it's very easy, and it sounds like a great solution. We're going to expand background checks to make sure that we keep guns out of the hands of people with mental illness problems, and then you have advocates for the mentally ill step up and say, wait a minute, you know, what about privacy violations? What about stigmatization? I mean, there are
that's a legitimate concern.
It is, and you know, that's why the ACLU and other advocacy groups oppose the Obama administration executive order on keeping or taking guns away from elderly senior citizens who needed help with their daily business. You know, if you asked for help with your financial affairs, you had to give up your guns, and you know, the ACLU wasn't comfortable with that. Other groups weren't comfortable with that. There are measures, though, I think, we're starting to talk about this. Set apart the kids, you know, that's a very powerful, very emotional response, and I'm sure the gun lobby, the gun control lobby is going to put a lot of money behind sustaining that, but that's not where the real solutions are going to come from. I was impressed with what President Trump did yesterday in meeting with the White House with a whole lot of different people and listening to their ideas, and then saying, I'm going to go out and talk to the governors, because there are things we can do and we can get consensus on. You hear the NRI saying, bump stocks, yeah, we support banning bump stocks. Well, let's start there and see what the next step would be.
Right.
The NRA supports, and has for a long time, expanded background checks. You've got to expand those background checks in a way that you don't stigmatize people who are getting treatment for mentally ill and for mental illnesses, but you have to distinguish between those and, you know, folks like this kid who were in Florida, the shooter in Florida, who were clearly a danger to other people, and lots of people knew that.
But a danger on what level, and where was it categorized, and where was it was it written down?
So here's the thing that no one wants to talk about, and that I think you can't get at solving this problem without reaching into, is the proliferation of guns themselves, right? Does it make sense for there to be 300 million guns in a nation of 300 million people? Now, that's the reality, right? That's the truth right now. We can't go back and undo that, but are we completely helpless to imagine that there maybe could be less, or that we could do things that would lower that number? And certainly lowering the availability of guns is part of the, and that's where the NRA, that's where you get crosswise with the NRA.
The number of guns in this country has doubled over the last 20 years.
It has.
Oh my God. Gun violence has decreased 50%.
Yes, it has.
I don't know that the only solution is less guns. And if you focus on,
but see, there you
if
go.
you start
and there you go.
on,
now you say only solution. I didn't say anything about only solution. Nobody's talking about only this or that.
But
and that's
if you put the focus
that the gun rights advocates
you put the
too
focus
often
on
run
banning guns and taking away guns, you get
the focus got to be on all
what
of it.
you see, starting to see differently this time, is people are talking about solutions that might work. In terms
they
of
all might work in concert is the point, and there's certain
any one of them might help. But you have, and
so then why can't we talk about the
what
number of guns?
So what would you do? How would you reduce the number of guns?
What about gun buybacks and melting them down when we do
done
that? But I mean real incentives to get guns off the streets. What about restricting the sale of certain types of weapons?
We've tried that. We had a 10-year ban on assault weapons. It didn't work.
Well, because
the city of Washington,
it didn't work how?
It didn't decrease the number of mass shootings.
But it decreased the number of assault weapons that were on the street at that point.
And it had no effect.
Well, and what it's
so do you want real solutions or solutions that make you feel good?
Hang on. Let's talk about maybe a graduated solution plan here. I think that there's still a lot of question as to why an 18-year-old can get their hands on an AR.
And so there's a solution you can support.
You have to be 21 to be able to get a handgun.
Okay, and so you reconcile that, and I think you could build support for that.
Why should anyone be able to?
Hang on one second. Let him finish.
I think those are the ideas you could start to build support for. You're starting to hear people talk about clip sizes and capacity of magazine.
Right.
I think you can build support around that. Yeah. But when you start talking about we're going to ban certain classes of guns, or we're going to take guns away, or whatever, that's where the conversation
stops. Hang on one second.
What's the reason to sell an AR-15 to anyone? What's the reason for that?
What's the reason to sell any gun to anyone?
Well,
how is it any different?
That's a gun.
How is it any different than a Ruger 30-30? What makes it any different?
So should I be able to go? Should I be able to go buy a shoulder rocket as well? Why not?
Well, you can't buy those weapons. There's certain weapons you can't buy.
Why?
But you tell me how that AR-15 or that AK-47 is different than the Ruger hunting rifle that's in every.
I guess I don't want to draw. I don't want to have to draw that
distinction.
Tell me
what the difference is.
What I want to say is
it's cosmetics.
It's not cosmetics.
It's cosmetic.
You were talking about clip size. You're talking about the number of shots.
That's different than the gun itself.
But
so why don't you deal with things that would make that gun less dangerous?
Certain guns shoot those clips, and others don't. I mean, you don't own guns that do that.
So
right?
You don't know what I own. So why? So
you're a hunter. You're not
limit
using that for hunting.
You could. Some people do. Some people certainly do. Yeah. You could limit the clip size and neuter that gun.
My point is.
So why not talk about something?
Hang on one second, Nolan. Hang on one second, Nolan. I think, and I don't want to take the point out of your mouth here, but I think when you look at it was a gun that was designed to be used militarily to kill people. Yeah. That's where they say that
guns kill people.
Exactly. Yeah. So then the question that people have then is why is there a difference between an 18-year-old getting a hold of a gun versus a 21-year-old and getting hold of a handgun? A 3-day waiting period versus no waiting period.
There are things we can come to agreement on if we deal with facts and reality. Rifles are responsible for less than 3% of the homicides in this country. Knives kill more people than rifles. Are we focusing on the right thing? The majority of mass shootings, the majority of homicides are committed by pistols.
Right.
And all the conversation this week is about assault
So
rifles.
let me take.
And they're used in less than 15% of
Let me
mass
take
shootings.
this one step further because I think that we see that there can be some consensus on some small issues here. Right. Something that has disturbed me in the conversation this week is talking about arming teachers. Yeah. So when we talk about school safety, I mean, we've had had a lot of conversation about guns and waiting periods and the background checks and the nuance of that and mental health. But when we start talking about how safe our schools are, and will making our schools, by making them safer, does that mean putting guns in the hands of teachers who are there? And I'm going to start with you on that, Stephen.
No, I think that's crazy. I mean, and again, only in a country, though, and we got to start talking about this as well, not just the number of guns, but the history of arms and violence and weapons in this country. This is the most violent country ever to exist on this planet. It was born out of a revolution. It has fought a war over bondage with itself. It's fought many other wars around the globe, and it is still the only nation in the world to ever use a nuclear weapon against another nation. That is part of our DNA, and that is part of what drives this and makes us so different from other countries. I think in order to get to the idea of a society with less violence and less weapons, fewer weapons, we got to confront that history of who we are as well. And that's also freighted with race and class and gender and all these other things that no one wants to really talk about. So all of these things are connected.
So you don't believe teachers should be armed?
I don't believe teachers should be armed. I believe most people should be armed.
And you do not believe it as well?
I think that's probably a more reasonable discussion than dissolving the nation. I don't think teachers should be armed, but I do think we should have better security in schools. I think you should have armed security guards, train people. It's not just about, a teacher might know the mechanics of a gun. You need somebody trained in a situation.
So you're saying every, high school? Are we going to go to elementary schools, middle schools? That every school should have armed security guards?
I would put security in every school because
who pays for that?
This is hit every school. We're going to have to pay for it the same way we
do it in urban schools already.
There's metal detectors.
We're going to have to pay for it the same way we pay for everything else. I mean, if it's important to us, we're going to have to
borrow the money, right?
I mean, education, schools have budgets, and if security should be a priority, a budget priority. And I don't think, my workplace, I have to swipe to get in. Why should I be able to walk in a school and check in at the office? By that time, it's too late. So I think we need to tighten security in schools, including guards.
Okay, so I think we brought up some really valid points here of discussion. My fear is that a week from now, 2 weeks from now, we're not going to be talking about this anymore, because the fact that, the president even talked about banning bump stocks. That was a Vegas shooting conversation back in October, and it didn't get anywhere. I'm concerned that you hear the passion from these young people. You're having lawmakers come out and say emphatically, we need this or I need this. Is it actually going to go anywhere? Are we actually going to see anything?
No, I think it will. And I think if you keep the conversation focused on these things that might work, and you don't try to attach a whole lot of other things to them. If you say, we're going to ban bump stocks, we're going to limit clips, we're going to expand background checks, I think you can get votes in Congress for those. If you stick to those measures, I think you can get some action, and they might actually work.
And I think
at the state level, you might see some different action as well.
You're talking about quarter turns. The issue is the prevalence of and proliferation of weapons in this society from the beginning to now, and the uses for those weapons from the beginning to now. This is not accidental. This is sort of an intentional outgrowth of the founding of this country, and I think we got to.
And if that
we got to talk about that.
If that becomes a conversation, nothing will get done.
Well, and it's going to be very interesting to see how this next generation tackles this, because they're
grown up with.
They're all growing up with,
and that'll be their choice and their responsibility when they get in those
I will look
positions.
forward to see where that goes from there.